Hey, welcome back to our series through the book of Exodus. So last week we left Moses talking to God through a burning bush on a mountaintop, receiving instructions on how God was going to use him to deliver God's people from slavery in Egypt. We talked about the significance of God re-revealing himself as the God who loves his children. So we're picking up today in the middle of the conversation, right after God had just given Moses 9 verses worth of detailed instructions on how this would all take place, which really could have been the end of the conversation. But it reminds me a lot of me and my husband, Michael. So he's definitely the fun one, and if it wasn't for him, I'd probably never leave the house. But there are times when I really don't want to go. So that's when I start asking questions like, is there really money in the budget for this trip? Or don't we have work in the morning? And if he's really excited about an idea or a trip, then he'll have an answer for every question I throw at him, until finally we've tossed questions and answers back and forth so long that it's time for me to admit that I'm only answering these questions or asking these questions because I don't want to drive 3 hours on a weekday to attend a concert for a band I don't really care about. This is where we're going to continue our conversation between God and Moses, because Moses' questions last week, who am I that you're talking to me about this, and who are you, are important, legitimate questions to the mission that God has for Moses. We're going to see that Moses' continued questions, though, become a sign of his disobedience. But thankfully, God is always faithful to follow through on his plans, as we'll see as we continue through Exodus. So let's take a moment to read straight from God's word in Exodus 4, 1 through 17. Moses answered, "What if they won't believe me, or will not obey me, but say, 'The Lord didn't appear to you'?" The Lord asked him, "What is in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. "Throw it on the ground," he said. So Moses threw it on the ground. It became a snake, and he ran from it. The Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand and grab it by the tail." So he stretched out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. "This will take place," he continued, "so that they will believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." In addition, the Lord said to him, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, his hand was diseased, resembling snow. "Put your hand back inside your cloak," he said. So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, it had again become like the rest of his skin. If they will not believe you and will not respond to the evidence of the first sign, they may believe the evidence of the second sign. And if they don't believe even those 2 signs, or listen to what you say, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the Nile will become blood on the ground. But Moses replied to the Lord, "Please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, either in the past or recently or since you've been speaking to your servant, because my mouth and my tongue are sluggish." The Lord said to him, "Who placed a mouth on humans? Who makes a person mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say." Moses said to him, "Please, Lord, send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "Isn't Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and also he's on his way now to meet you. He'll rejoice when he sees you. You will speak with him and tell him what to say. I will help both you and him to speak and will teach you both what to do. He will speak to the people for you. He will serve as a mouth to you, and you will serve as God to him. And take the staff in your hand, that you will perform the signs with it." So the first hole that Moses wants to poke in the plan was to question what to do if they didn't believe Moses, that God had really been sent by Moses. So in verse 1, it says, "What if they won't believe me? And what if they'll not obey me but say, 'The Lord didn't appear to you'?" Notice that he said they and not he. Moses' task is to confront the most powerful man in Egypt, so powerful that the Egyptians viewed him as a god. At any moment in their upcoming exchange, Pharaoh could have ordered to have Moses executed and had an entire army behind him. But Moses' fear isn't for Pharaoh. It's for the people of Israel who are in slavery. To understand the significance of that to Moses, you've got to remember that this will not be the first time that Moses has attempted to assist his people. Do you remember a few weeks ago when we talked about Moses' attempt to rescue one of the Israelites from an Egyptian who was hurting him. The support was not well received. In fact, the next day, one of the Israelites said to him, "Who made you commander and judge over us?" And here Moses is coming back, being sent by the Lord to command and to judge them. Moses has always had a complicated relationship with his people. He was kind of one of them and kind of not. He was also kind of functioning as an adopted royal Egyptian son while his people were enslaved. Today, someone in a similar situation might hear mean names like rich boy or sellout. I think we can all relate to times when we felt like we were not enough in comparison to someone else. You may not have grown up in church, so you don't feel religious enough. Or maybe you're not from here and you don't understand the social cues. Maybe everyone seems to have their life together and you're not advancing into the next life stage fast enough, or you're not handling your current life stage as well as other people around you seem to be. There's always some excuse we can give as to why we're not qualified enough to obey God's command when we look around and start weighing our worth by how we perceive that others feel about us. But where would that leave us? Because if God just appeared to Moses and revealed himself to Moses and gave no assignment, Moses might not have been afraid to go and share with the people that he had been with God. They might believe him or they might not, but there really would be no consequences either way. The fear is not just that the people won't believe him, but that he will still need to try to fulfill God's assignment to gather up the people and bring them back to the promised land, and those people might not believe him enough to follow him. Moses is afraid of putting himself out there and being left hung out to dry by God and all the people. So essentially he's asking God, what do I do if they don't believe me? So God provides him an answer. Let's look at verse 2. The Lord asked him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. "Throw it on the ground," he said. So Moses threw it on the ground. It became a snake and he ran from it. So God gives Moses with a sign for the people by turning his staff into a snake, which is ironic because normally he would use his staff to protect his sheep from snakes. So notice what God says there at the end, that this will take place so that they will believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, has appeared to you. God is directly addressing Moses' fear about the response of the people. God gives Moses two more signs, a hand disease, which is a sign that Moses can't run from this time, and the ability to turn the Nile water into blood, a symbol of God's power over the Egyptian gods. And we could pick apart each of these signs and try to find the hidden meaning and symbolism in each of them, but I don't want you to miss the significance of each of these signs. They all point to God being able to do something that humans cannot do. This show of the miraculous was evidence that God was leading and directing Moses. So Moses' assignment, as we'll find out in the upcoming weeks, was not to only lead the Israelites when they were willing to follow him, but to be obedient to God in spite of their disobedience to others. So you can't let the support of others become an idol in your life that keeps you from saying yes to God's calling. God is our support. But don't hear me say something that I'm not saying. I'm not saying that we don't need each other. It's so significant to have the support of our church community and leadership. We're insanely blessed with all of our life group leaders and ministry leaders and the community we have here at our church. God made us to work together and to lean on each other. But if we start to use the community that we wish that we had as an excuse to avoid obedience, then the ideal community has become an idol to us. It's okay to grieve the mentors that you wish you had or the spiritual support from a parent or church leader that just wasn't enough. But when we start to use their disobedience as an excuse for your disobedience, you're still the one who isn't responding to God's call. Your response to God and his calling for your life can't depend on how you're perceiving that everyone else feels about that calling at any given moment. Now, let's take a look at Moses' second excuse. Let's jump down to verse 10. But Moses replied to God, "Please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, either in the past or recently or since you've been speaking to your servant, because my mouth and my tongue are sluggish." Moses' second excuse is that he's just not qualified based on his skill set. He says, I'm not very eloquent, which means I'm just not a great communicator. When he says my mouth and my tongue are sluggish, the word sluggish could also be translated as heavy, like a tool that's just way too heavy to use, and so it's useless and kind of gets in the way. I relate to that. Moses doesn't just say that he's not currently a good speaker. He says, I've never been eloquent, either in the past or recently or since you've been speaking to your servant. It makes me wonder if maybe there's another moment in his past that he's thinking back on that makes him feel inadequate in this area. And notice that God never disagrees with him, assuring him that he's really not that bad of a speaker as he thinks he is. Have you ever made a negative comment about yourself to another person in the hopes that they would say, no, that's not true, but they agree with you instead? Yeah, so instead of hyping up Moses, God comforts him in his weakness, and he redirects Moses' mindset. So let's look at that at verse 11. The Lord said to him, who placed a mouth on humans? Who makes a person mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. God comforts Moses in his weakness by reminding him that he himself is the creator and has all the power. God promises to help him speak and to help him know what to say. In a way, God is saying, I'll handle my responsibilities and you can handle your responsibilities. As long as Moses' attention is on his own ability and suitability to the calling, his weaknesses seem really, really, really big. But Moses' weaknesses and problems are very small in comparison to God's power and his ability. God is our creator. We can depend on him to give us all the resources we need to fulfill the mission that he's given us. Because God did a lot of amazing things through Moses. In fact, history remembers Moses very differently than he would describe himself. In Acts, the first martyr of the early church gave a sermon through the Israelites' history right before he was executed. And he describes Moses like this. So Moses was educated in all wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in his speech and actions. He said he was powerful in speech. So God's people clearly remembered Moses by what God did through him, not by his weaknesses. Giving excuses for our ability as a reason to say no to God is just disobedience disguised as false humility. God sees right through it because he knows our hearts. The truth is, none of us can depend on our own abilities. It would be arrogant to think that our skill set is the only way that God is able to move in our communities. He's blessed us with the opportunity to be a part of what he's doing, with the promise that he's going to completely resource the work. Imagine looking back on your life and seeing someone else who is faithful to God, enjoying all the benefits of God's mission. Maybe a closer, fully surrendered walk with the Lord and experiencing up close lives being changed by the gospel. And a ministry that you were supposed to be a part of, but passed on because you didn't think you were good enough to be involved in. Moses will get to understand a similar type of regret as he watches the leader that follows him be prepared to enter the promised land without Moses. And some of you might say that you're already looking back on a life of regret and missed opportunity. And to that I would say, if you're still here, there's still a mission that God has for you. Don't let your dependence on your own ability allow you to miss a life of obedience. So I'd like to pause for a moment and make a comparison between Moses and Jeremiah, because I think it's so significant that the God of all the universe chose so many people who were terrified to be called. I'm sure there were people that would have responded more enthusiastically to be accepted by God, and we do see some examples of that kind of response throughout Scripture. But God seems to take a special delight in comforting people who absolutely lose their mind with worry when God hands them down their assignment. So in that vein, let's read Jeremiah. We're going to read his calling in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 4. It says, "The word of the Lord came to me. I chose you before I formed you in the womb. I set you apart before you were born. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." But I protested, "Oh no, Lord God. Look, I don't know how to speak since I'm only a youth." Then the Lord said to me, Do not say, I am only a youth, for you will go to everyone I send you to and speak whatever I tell you. Do not be afraid of anyone, for I will be with you to rescue you. This is the Lord's declaration. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and told me, I have now filled your mouth with my words. See, I have appointed you today over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and demolish, to build and to plant. Notice the similarities there between Jeremiah's calling and Moses' calling. Their initial concern is the same. They're just not gifted speakers. Although Jeremiah points to his insecurity about his age and his lack of experience. They both have concerns about the responses of the people. Moses voices his concern. And Jeremiah, it must have been something he was thinking because God assures him not to worry about it. God promises both of them that he will provide them the words to say. Notice how God comforts both of them in their concerns. Moses, through the reminder that God is the creator, and Jeremiah, by touching his mouth to express that God has provided Jeremiah's words. But Jeremiah's calling conversation ends there, and he begins his first assignment. And Moses' conversation about his calling is about to invoke God's wrath. They both had questions about God's plan for their lives, but let's see what made the difference there. Let's head back to Exodus 4. We're going to look down at verse 13. Moses said, please, Lord, send someone else. And there it is. There's the moment when Moses has to stop pretending that he's asking for clarification and has to admit that he just doesn't want to do what God is asking him to do. He wants to be content and staying with his little family, supporting his little sheep business, and not having to take any big risks. He's fully prepared to miss out. And that's when the Lord's anger burns against Moses, when he is outright asking to pass on God's plan for his life. Jeremiah's response mirrors Moses in some ways, but he didn't anger God with questioning to the point of basically saying no, which raises the question we should all take some time to reflect on. At what point is stalling from responding to God's command because of fear count as disobedience? How long can we know what we need to do and let excuses get in the way before we're essentially saying no in God's face? But this is not the last we're going to see of Moses. God doesn't zap him and move on to someone else. God is still gracious to Moses and offers him a way out by bringing in the support of his brother Aaron. But we'll see through Moses' story how Aaron becomes a stumbling block and sometimes a crutch for Moses. We've all seen a child that was way too old for a pacifier but was holding on to it because it still brought them comfort. Loving parents will help the child move past this dependence because they know it's holding the child back and because they know it's going to cost them way too much in dental bills. But just like a child that is too old to continue using a pacifier, we can become dependent on things that make us feel comfortable instead of depending on God. We must choose to either fully depend on God or live in disobedience to his plans. And God expects our obedience. But Moses' ability to depend on God is going to grow as he spends more time with him and learns to walk in obedience, with a few slip-ups around the way. God doesn't let Moses off the hook, though, about being his messenger. God continues to speak through Moses, sometimes with the assistance of Aaron, until God's people are ready to enter the promised land. As we continue to look at Moses' life and how he was greatly used by God, let's reflect on some things. Is there anything that God is calling you to do that you're avoiding? Let's not miss out on God's plan for our lives. And maybe some of you are doing what God asked you to do, but you're grinning and bearing it because your fears and anxieties have so much of a control over your life. Think this through. Where are you obeying reluctantly where you could be trusting God fully? As we enter into this time of worship and response, pray to ask God to reveal to you areas in your life where you are using excuses to avoid fully obeying God. If you want to confess those to God privately at your seat, feel free, but also know that the altar is a really great place to come and speak to God and to have your church family come alongside you as you're wrestling. If you need to have a conversation with your life group leader or ministry leader, feel free to pull them aside at this time. If you come to the end of this time and you're still unsure about your next step, but you're feeling God's pull in your life, we'd love to pray with you through that and have you join us for our upcoming serving class in August. In that case, maybe God is just asking you to open up and to commit right now fully to surrender to what God reveals to you as you're praying through that process. However God is leading you, let's respond now.